Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us here on a special evening at 6 o'clock. And we have a really great discussion in store for you this evening because we have the experts that you need to ask your questions to. And if you've ever, thought about something that you're like, I just don't understand, this is the time to go ahead and give us your questions. I'm News 5 investigator Jonathan Walsh, one of the hosts. Also, Karen Kassler is here with us.
I'm Karen Kassler. I'm the State House Bureau Chief for Ohio's public radio and television stations. And I'd like to ask the panelists to go around and introduce themselves. Let's start with Tom Herron.
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Tom Herron. I'm here in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm the spokesperson for the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol.
And Bill, how about you? Go ahead.
I'm Bill Shuck. I'm in Columbus, and I am representing the statewide coalition of groups, Protect Ohio Workers and Families, opposing issue 2.
How about Michelle?
Hey everyone, my name is Michelle Samakis. I'm editor of Cannabis Business Times. We are a media and events organization that serves state legal licensed businesses in the country. Thank you for having us.
And I'm Gary Walski. I'm president of the Ohio Fraternal Order of Police.
All right, guys, again, thank you so much for joining us and answering the questions from our viewers. I did have one that came in that I pretty much can go ahead and answer. If this passes, what about the smell? Are we going to smell it everywhere? Well, I can tell you by my trip up to Michigan and talking to people who've now had this legal for 5 years, yes, you will be smelling it pretty much everywhere. Now, it's not legal to consume it outside the home. But they said, yes, it's happening in the grocery stores, at events, and so on and so forth. So I can tell you from those who are up in Michigan, that's what they tell me. But then we also had this question. If this passes, how will it affect medicinal marijuana card holders, or will it at all? We have that from Jenny. And how about we give that to Michelle?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's something that other states have tackled in the past. So in states where there have been a medical program established and adult use has gone online, there have been special hours and also sometimes special registers put in place for medical patients so that they would still have priority access to medicine and to the treatment that they have been using as part of the program. So in my conversations with cannabis business owners in the state, I have understood that is will continue to be a priority, serving the medical patients. And I guess the one thing that would help would just to be improving access. So we know that there are just over 183,000 patients in the state of Ohio now. But historically, there have been close to 370,000 patients, which means that maybe not everybody has been able to continue with the program, whether it be a cost, it's cost prohibitive, or because you can't seek a prescription from traditional doctors as you can for other medicines. So there's a lot of issues of access that adult use legalization could benefit both, people who are not as part of the program and who are also part of the program today.
Well, I have a question that I think both the yes side and the no side might want to answer here. Along with the medicinal marijuana market, there's also an illicit market for marijuana in Ohio. Why not capitalize on that? Why not accept that and tax it and regulate it? Why not? And I'll just throw that out to Bill Shuck first.
You mean the current market?
Yes.
Well, I think that's what the folks proposing issue 2 want to do. That's a good question, but it doesn't deal with the harms that marijuana causes. The tax does not make up for the amount of mental health problems, the violence, the car crashes, the other things. There was a study done in 2018 in Colorado by the Centennial Institute, and they found that the social costs of legalizing recreational marijuana were 4.5 times the amount that came in tax revenue. And so the problem is that the harms, the costs far outweigh the tax revenue.
Tom, you want to join in on that?
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. Quite frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. It makes all the sense in the world to regulate the sale of marijuana to adults. 24 states have already, for the last 10 years, some of them, been regulating the sale of marijuana to adults, and those programs have been wildly successful. It's the best way to protect public health, because you're taking products from an illicit market that aren't tested, that aren't regulated, that oftentimes can be laced with other illicit drugs that consumers don't know about, and you're bringing those products into a regulated market where they are tested, where consumers have confidence those products are safe, they know exactly what the potency is of those products when they're making that purchase. And we also know that regulated markets are the best way to keep marijuana out of the hands of children. Study after study after study confirms that when states make the decision to regulate the sale of marijuana to adults, youth usage does not increase. So we know regulated markets protect public health. We know that they're the best way to protect children. And we also know it's the best way to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new tax revenue every single year to these states. And Ohio State University, the Drug Enforcement Policy Center, estimates that issue 2 will generate over $400 million every year in new tax revenue that will be reinvested back into our local communities. And, I also want to touch on the question about the medical marijuana program. So if issue 2 passes, it would operate alongside the existing medical marijuana program. That medical program continues to stay in place. The regulations that guarantee an uninterrupted supply of medical marijuana to patients stay in place. Patients can continue to use the same dispensaries that they're using today to buy their medicine. And, Michelle's right that even while our medical marijuana program for the last 6 or 7 years has been wildly successful from a regulatory and safety reliability standpoint, there still are too many barriers for Ohio patients who can't participate in the medical program. For instance, maybe you're a veteran suffering from PTSD whose doctor through the VA can't write a recommendation for medical marijuana because of the status of federal law. Or maybe you're a cancer patient treated by one of the major health systems who also prohibit their doctors from writing recommendations. Or maybe you live in a rural part of the state and there's not a medical marijuana dispensary near you, so your only real option is to either turn to the illicit market or to drive to Michigan and spend your money and tax revenue in the state up north. So, I know people talk about issue 2 like it's quote unquote recreational marijuana, but the reality is that issue 2 is also about patients who were promised access to life-changing treatment that they never got 6 years ago.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for that. And I want to mention also Rick over here in our comments. He was saying that his wife, with her multiple sclerosis, she's been suffering with that. And marijuana's helped. It increased in appetite, relaxing her muscles and sleep. Now she's down to just 6 medications as opposed to 14 different medications. So that's Rick's 2 cents. We appreciate you chiming in, Rick. I do want to, real quick though, I want to talk to Gary Wolski about the potential impact of crime after legalization. Now, some states report little to no impact. Others have revealed a different experience. What are your main concerns when it comes to potential impacts of crime?
A couple of things, but if I can, I would just like to mention something respond to something that Tom mentioned. $400 million in taxes is a wonderful thing, except the National Institute of Highway Safety has determined or estimated that there'd be 50 people lose their lives in Ohio because of this. So I guess we've put a price on the lives of the citizens of Ohio. Getting back to your original question, I think that Colorado has seen a 9% increase in property crimes and about a 16% increase in violent crimes since marijuana started there. The number of traffic accidents has increased everywhere. The number of folks that are admitting to having used marijuana prior to getting behind the wheel has increased tremendously. We all know that marijuana use slows your reaction time. This causes more accidents, causes more injuries. I think the estimate was somewhere around 2,000 more injury accidents in the state of Ohio by NHTSA with, opening up recreational marijuana. So that's just a brief overview of what the crime problems will be.
Thank you, Gary. Karen.
I wanted to ask on the yes side, and of course the no side is free to chime in as well. There's been concern by business groups who are opposed to this that there will be an effect on worker productivity and safety. There was a study in July 2020 from the National Institute on Drug Abuse showing employees who tested positive for marijuana had 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% greater absenteeism compared to those who tested negative. So does that not show that there is something that employers need to be worried about when it comes to marijuana? Not only that, but also the increased cost of testing their employees for marijuana?
It's a great question, Karen, and I'm going to answer it. But first, I have to respond to Mr. Wolski's point on crime in some of these other states, because again, look, the opponents of issue 2 have resorted to trying to scare Ohio voters, right? What we've heard from the opposition campaign over the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, is the same old reefer madness talking points that have been debunked in the decade worth of experience that we have in adult use markets. All you have to do is look at data from the United States Department of Justice itself. And I'm going to quote from a study that they published where they say, quote, "The concern that legalizing cannabis for recreational purposes may increase crime occupies a prominent position in the public debate about drugs. Our analysis suggests that such concern is not justified." End quote. The data's clear. When you regulate the sale of marijuana for adults, it does not lead to an increase in crime. And in fact, the Department of Justice again confirms that what it does is lead to an increase in crime clearance rates, meaning the amount of crimes that are ultimately solved, whether it's by prosecution or otherwise, from law enforcement, because you free up resources from law enforcement and because they don't have to worry about low-level marijuana offenses. So again, the data is clear. All you have to do is ask the United States Department of Justice. Now, to your question about workforce, I know there's a lot of concern from employers, but again, look, this is an area where we have good news, not just from the other states that have legalized and regulated the sale of marijuana to adults, but all you have to do is look to the country up north and look to Canada, where they have been federally regulating the sale of marijuana to adults, again, for 4 or 5 years now. And there was actually just a study published this summer, I believe it came out at the end of August, that finds there is no increase, there's no difference in workplace injury for those users who use marijuana outside of work than for those workers who don't consume marijuana. So the difference here is that we believe employees can responsibly use marijuana outside of work. The same way that you can have a beer at a happy hour, or you can do what we do in Cleveland when we watch the Browns beat the 49ers on Sundays. You're at no greater risk of workplace injury when you go back to work.
I want to ask about that study, turn that question over to Bill Shuck, that study that Tom just mentioned from Ohio State University's Drug Enforcement and Policy Center in August of 2022, showing that recreational marijuana legalization appears to increase state employment growth, and there may have been virtually no impact on productivity or perhaps even a small positive effect. Does that suggest that the fear of loss of productivity and businesses moving out of state might be exaggerated?
No, I don't think so. We have in our coalition, we have most of the major business organizations in the state. They know their businesses, they know their employees, and Mr. Herron likes to deride them, but they do know their industry and they do know their business and they know what works and what doesn't work. They are on the ground every day. And so I think for our listeners, you can cite studies going back and forth and back and forth. And I think a real practical question is you look at the folks that are on the no side versus the folks that are on the yes side. And the folks that are on the no side are the business leaders of Ohio, hospitals, physicians, veterans, folks, the law enforcement, the folks who spend their whole life dedicated to protecting public health and safety. And so Mr. Herron kind of plays fast and loose with various statistics. And the truth is that it is a problem and the business leaders recognize it.
All right, Bill, thank you very much for that answer. I want to go to some of the comments that we're seeing in here. Dwayne says this is bad for Ohio. Blind Snipers says war on personal freedom. This is bad for driving. More accidents, says Dwayne. A lot of comments coming in. We appreciate you definitely chiming in with your questions. I do have something for Michelle. Because I've heard some concerns into our newsroom from people saying, okay, we're going to be making tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And could you help explain the component where 36% of the sales taxes will be going with the Social Equity and Jobs Fund? In what that looks like and how that will impact, people who in the past may have had some incidents with the law.
Absolutely. So, Tom, chime in here too anytime. I know he's more of an expert in this area, but part of the benefit of issue 2 and legalizing cannabis for adult use is that tax benefit at 10%. There are designations toward different buckets. One being social equity and jobs, as I believe Tom has mentioned in the past. Cannabis prohibition has been disproportionately applied to economically disadvantaged areas and to people of color. And one of the ideas between social justice initiatives and social equity initiatives in Ohio and other states is to help to remedy that history. We know prohibition has not worked for several reasons. One being a thriving illicit market continues in the state. And again, another being that it's been disproportionately applied. So in terms of that 36% and what it would actually do, I'd like Tom to sort of chime in there if he has some more details about how that would be applied. But that is something that that would benefit the state greatly. I know that both. I wanted to chime in too, if I could, on one other question that was brought up or one other issue about who supports issue 2 and who doesn't. It's not necessarily true that all law enforcement and health professionals oppose issue 2. In fact, there is an organization nationally that has supported ending prohibition in several states. And they are a group of law enforcement professionals who've seen that it has not worked, who think that resources should be dedicated in other areas. The name is LEAP, Law Enforcement Professionals Against Prohibition. So anyway, just looking at the issues, it's not really, it's not that health professionals in law enforcement are against it across the board. That's just not the case. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. Tom, if you wanted to chime in about that specific percentage. Where that would go.
Of course, happy to do so, and I'll try to be brief here to walk through. So under issue 2, of the $400 million that Ohio State University estimates issue 2 will generate, 36% of that amount goes to a new social equity and jobs program that will do lots of really important things in our communities across the state. That money will be used to encourage diversity hiring practices. It will be used to study and fund important criminal justice reform efforts, including expungements, legal aid, etc. It will also be used to fund, and this is maybe the most important piece of the Social Equity and Jobs Fund, but that money will be used to make, quote, direct investment in disproportionately impacted communities to enhance education, entrepreneurism, legal aid, youth development, violence prevention, and the arts. So issue 2 is about restoring these communities that have been harmed by marijuana prohibition over the last 50 years or so.
Yeah, Tom, I appreciate that. And I know, Gary, you have an opinion about this because obviously as someone from law enforcement, these are people who did break the law. And now there may be some rewarding of that here down the line, or at least some sentiment of that. How do you feel about this Social Equity and Jobs Fund and who it applies to?
Well, to me, I think it amounts to the fact that we're going to pay the street dealer to go away and go sell in a dispensary instead. That's what that means to me. we're going to take folks that are on the street selling marijuana, put them out of business, so we're going to give them a job in a dispensary. That's not going to happen. Oregon found that 70% of their marijuana sales were still black market sales. They're not going away. If we want to take these folks off the street, I think the laws need to be stricter. We need to do more enforcement with it, not open it up to recreational marijuana where everybody's doing it. And as you mentioned earlier, walking down the street, that's all you smell. I was recently in Las Vegas and Seattle, and that's all you smell. I mean, I'd rather walk through smog in a Rust Belt city than smell that all day long. And the same thing happened at the Browns game Sunday. There were a lot of folks about 3 rows in front of me from San Francisco, and their entire game was involved in smoking marijuana, and the whole section stunk from it.
Yeah.
But again, to your point about the social and job equity, I think that's just trying to remove the street dealer and put him in a more conducive environment, maybe to sell, so he's not standing on the street corner.
Yeah, Gary, thank you for that.
Jonathan, I
Yeah,
would
Bill.
like to weigh in on that if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
This is special interest legislation, and there are a lot of really special interest provisions in it, but this is perhaps the most cynical one. This is a ploy to attract minority voters. What this really wants to do is put more dispensaries in minority and low-income neighborhoods. It is a marketing ploy. And the people, if you actually read the legislation, it talks about folks who are of color or have a particular race, plus in a low-income area, plus have been previously convicted of various crimes. And so the part about targeting, giving a preference based on race or color, was just held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in the last 2 months. And so that's a false promise. And the point about hiring criminals is all the way through issue 2. It specifically says really serious criminals can't be hired, but then it gives it back and says, well, if it's more than 5 years ago, they can be. And if it's related to marijuana, even marijuana trafficking, they're given a preference. They're recruited, they're subsidized. And so basically that 36% of those taxes are going to go right back into the marijuana industry. So this is pretty cynical, actually.
All right, Bill, thank you for that. Karen, do you want to go over some of the comments that we're seeing in here? And a lot of people chiming in. We appreciate your participation.
I'm going to have to leave that to you, Jonathan, because I can't see the comments.
Sorry. Okay, my fault.
This is all live. This is the wonder of live broadcasting, right?
This is, yes, no doubt about it.
I do have a question for Bill and Gary, though.
Oh, sure. Okay, go ahead.
I've heard several references to the legalization of recreational marijuana will cause a mental health crisis. What is the evidence for that? And what specifically, where do you come up with that?
Yeah, I'll take that. That's a great question. This legislation says it sets a minimum amount of THC. That's the active ingredient. It's got a longer chemical name, but that's the stuff that gets you high. And Tom's shaking his head. He did that before. He's just plain fibbing. It says, if you want me to, I can read you the statute. Karen's got it. Jonathan's got it. It says that it will be a minimum of 35% THC in plant materials and no less than 90% THC content in extracts. Now, if you talk to any mental health professional around the country or addiction specialist, and I do, and I have, their words are, this is insane. This is outrageous. And I've got sitting in my lap 3 studies about the dangers of high THC marijuana. It causes schizophrenia, it causes psychosis, it causes violent behavior, it lowers IQ, it causes a lack of attention, it causes domestic violence, violence against women. And there are so many studies out there that to even debate this I'm puzzled.
Okay.
There's just no question.
All right, Bill. Yes, Tom, you and I actually talked about this because somebody contacted our news station and had the same sort of question about the limit that we're talking. Can you explain what that limit means
Yes.
and how you view that?
Yes, I would be happy to, because this is another example of the opponents to issue 2 trying to scare voters and to tell them things that quite frankly, are not true. Under issue 2, there is a maximum amount of THC in the products that would be sold in an adult use market. The maximum amount of THC for plant material, for instance, is 35%. That's the current maximum for THC in our medical program for plant material. So issue 2 sets a maximum amount of THC. It gives some flexibility to the regulator. If they decide, for instance, that there are certain types of patients who need higher amounts of THC in products, the department can raise that THC limit, but it is a content limit for THC. So it is a maximum amount of THC in plant material and in extracts. It's very explicit in the language, and I really wish that our opponents would start telling Ohio voters the truth.
Would you like me to read the language so the voters can decide for themselves?
Be happy to.
It says that the the Cannabis Control Division will establish a THC content limit for adult cannabis.
Content limit.
For plant material, let me finish. The content limit shall be no less than 35%, not 35%, no less than.
The
Legislative Service Commission, which is the official law writing body of the legislature, has interpreted this to mean that they could set it anywhere from 35% to 100%. With extracts, it's from 90% to 100%. It further says, the content limit shall be no less than, but such content limits may be increased or eliminated. So what that means is you can't lower them from 35 or 90, but they can be raised. That's the language. And so, Tom, you're just not stating it correctly.
The content limit, Bill, come on, you know this. Content limit means maximum. I mean, come on, this is...
That's not what it says. That's not the way you wrote it.
It's exactly what it says.
Okay.
If I could jump in here for a minute, I think what's important to note here, though, is that there are regulations. There are things that are spelled out. There are standards. There is an illicit market that is active in the state where there are absolutely no standards for potency, for amounts, they don't test for mold. They don't test for heavy metals, anything that can be dangerous to consumers. This is a regulated market, and the whole idea is to keep people safe, to protect people from accessing it who are under 21. So I think that I think that this is a moot point. The whole point is, as you are reading, Bill, is that there are regulations put in place, and there's the bill's 42 some odd pages that are spelling out some of those. And more will be put into place once it's hopefully issue 2 passes in November.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
Jonathan,
thank you, guys. Yes, Gary.
One of the things that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and I did earlier when during your broadcast earlier, Governor DeWine mentioned it, and I know you and I spoke about it, what this does to toddlers. I know Colorado had a huge spike in emergency room visits with toddlers with edibles, the candy bar wrapping type things, the gummies, the brownies and cookies and things like that irresponsible parents were laying around. And everybody can sit there and say, nobody's going to do that. Well, we know that's not the case. That's not going to happen. These things are going to be laying around on counters and tables. And our young people, especially ones that can't read, that don't know what's in this stuff, are going to get a hold of these things. And it's going to cause some serious problems. As we also heard during your show, the mental health lady, the psychologist or researcher, whatever, talked about what marijuana does to the underdeveloped brain in our youngest people, and up until these folks are in their 20s, where your brain's still developing. I know I've seen studies that show that a person's IQ with regular use is about 8% lower than what it should be. And those are things that are concerning. If this becomes legal, not only is it going to, it's going to be legal, but we're going to put more people on our streets and on our roads that are going to be impaired. We already have a huge problem with alcohol impairment on the road, and now we're going to have a bigger problem with marijuana impaired people on the road. I'm not willing to put my family on the road, and I hope nobody else is willing to put their family on the road, knowing that people are going to be out there that are going to be impaired. Everywhere this has been legalized, traffic accidents have gone up and fatalities have gone up. And,
Okay.
to the point that I made earlier, wow, we're going to get $400 million in tax revenue, but people are going to lose their lives because of it.
Now, Gary, I appreciate you bringing up the child aspect of this, because we did get something from a woman named Kat. She says she's a pediatrician in Ohio, and she is worried about some of the things that Gary is bringing up, including the packaging. Will some of this packaging be child resistant that we've seen with prescriptions or Tide Pods or, this kind of thing? What do we have in place to help, which, first of all, the adults in these situations should be responsible adults. Not everybody is. So some of this obviously is on the parents. But what can you say about the packaging and some of the things that people are worried about when it comes to kids? I'll maybe Michelle, if you would like to take that.
Sure, absolutely. States across the country have implemented very secure child-proof packaging for cannabis products. Ohio has adopted that in its medical program. That would continue. But the issue 2 proposal does state packaging and labeling requirements that would be regulated by the Department of Commerce. The other thing is the marketing and advertising. Like, these are not packages that are attractive to children. There are policies in place to make sure that that is not targeted to minors. And again, the packaging is designed to prevent someone from accidentally accessing it, especially a toddler.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Karen,
Tom,
go ahead.
I missed? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have another thing to add?
Oh, I wanted to ask Tom if he wanted to
Oh,
jump in.
yeah.
I did.
No, that's exactly right, Michelle. Under issue 2, the Department of Commerce has not only the authority but the requirement to promulgate rules about packaging, labeling, advertising restrictions to ensure that advertising isn't done that targets minors. You have to be 21, obviously, to make a purchase at a legal adult use dispensary under issue 2. So there are express rules that will be in place, just like there are under our current medical marijuana program, where all products have to be approved. The packaging itself is child-proof, tamper evidence. Those same rules will apply in an adult use market.
Gotcha.
Except for when the parent leaves the bag of gummies open on the counter or on the table and the 2-year-old can't read yet.
All right. Good point. Karen, you have a question.
Yeah, I can now see the comments. And so I'm noticing that a lot of people have questions about the difference between marijuana and alcohol, that alcohol has the same kinds of dangers. There are dangers for, obviously, drinking and driving is illegal, just like using marijuana and driving would be illegal. But why is there so much concern about marijuana when alcohol has plenty of documented problems that are not being addressed here, I guess? And I was going to think, I thought maybe Bill might be able to take that question.
Sure, thank you. Well, there are problems with alcohol, and there are also problems with marijuana. And I don't think that fact that you have the problems with the one justify starting up problems with the other. There is a difference. Is the THC content in this industrial strength marijuana that the industry has created, as the governor says, this is not your grandfather's marijuana. Back in the day, it was the THC content was like maybe 2%, 3%. And now it can be up to 90%, 40 times. And it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it affects receptors in your brain very quickly and very powerfully. The low THC marijuana doesn't do that so much. The high THC marijuana that is pushed by the industry does that very quickly and very significantly, very lastingly. And that's what causes psychosis and schizophrenia and behavioral changes. And so the ability to impact the brain, the permanence and the depth of the impact is different than alcohol. That's not to say, alcohol doesn't have problems. It does. But with this high strength stuff, it's really, really very serious.
One of the other things, if I can piggyback on that, is, okay, we have a problem with alcohol related traffic accidents, let's say, but now we want to open up a whole nother area, and everywhere that this has happened, the states where it's legal, they've seen a 10 to 20% increase in the number of accidents. Well, why do we want to do that? If alcohol is bad enough, why are we going to add another bad thing for somebody to participate in on the streets with recreational marijuana? That's just, we're compounding the alcohol problem by adding another substance that people don't need in their system when they're on the roads driving.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, Tom, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah, just real quick. I actually agree. Under issue 2, it wouldn't be your granddaddy's marijuana, because your granddaddy's marijuana wasn't grown in a GMP quality cultivation facility, wasn't tested in a pharmaceutical grade testing lab before being sold to consumers, and it didn't generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new tax revenue. So, people, I think people understand. Issue 2 is not about whether people should use marijuana. People are using marijuana. They're just either buying it from a drug dealer or they're buying it from a dispensary up in Michigan. What issue 2 is about is regulating the sale, the production, and the consumption of marijuana in a safe and responsible manner, just like Ohio's been doing under its medical marijuana program for the last 6 or 7 years.
All right, Tom, thank you very much for that.
If that were true, they wouldn't be allowing home grow. This allows people to grow it at home, and to give it away to other people, there's no control over that. So if what Tom just said was true, that wouldn't be allowed under issue 2, but it is.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. I want to get to some of our people making comments online. One of the people here, Jason Randall, says, will issue 2 allow for an easy process to get cannabis business licenses? He says the current medical program allowed for only 25 licenses, which is a monopoly that they created. Either Tom or Michelle, would you like to tackle that?
Michelle, let me know if you want to chime in. Otherwise, I'm happy to take it.
You can go ahead.
Okay, yeah, great. So
I'll chime in, yeah.
Under issue 2, right off the bat, it authorizes 50 new dispensary licenses and 40 new cultivation licenses with a preference to social equity applicants. And then the Department of Commerce, after allowing for time for those social equity licenses to get up and running, the Department of Commerce has the ability to issue, additional licenses beyond that point, as it determines. One of the things we learned from some of these other states is you want to ensure that you have a managed licensure process, much similar, quite frankly, to the way that the state issues liquor licenses. You want to ensure that you provide enough access for consumers so that they don't feel like they have to turn to the illicit market or that they have to drive up to Michigan. But you also want to have it licenses be issued in a managed process so that you don't end up with an oversupply problem of licenses, which causes price crashes and other things that you don't necessarily want in that type of market. So under issue 2, the licensure is completely within the discretion of the Department of Commerce.
And just to chime in, the current numbers right now for cultivation is 23 level 1 provisional licenses, so based on facility size, 14 level 2 provisional licenses, and there's 104 certificates of operation for retailers. So there's about 104 dispensaries that are open in the state right now.
All right, thank you very much. Karen. Oh, she's having technical difficulties, perhaps. She's a little.
How about I unmute? Oh,
there
goodness.
you go. There you
we
go.
go. So I wanted to direct this question to Tom, and maybe Michelle can offer us a broader perspective nationwide here. The tax rate that was set in this is 10%, which puts Ohio down toward the bottom in terms of tax revenue from different states that have legalized recreational marijuana. Washington, 37%, Connecticut, 25%, Virginia, 21%. Now, yes, there is that study that says that it will raise $218 million in the first year, potentially. In a state budget that's as big as ours is, that's not a ton of money. Why did you go for something that low? And is that pretty typical from what you're seeing from later states that are legalizing marijuana, Michelle?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, okay. Yes. I mean, I think so. You're right. There are states that have far higher tax percentages for the excise tax. Now, just to mention too, that does not include the sales tax that would already apply. 10% is just one of the many taxes that regulated cannabis businesses have on their companies. So I can't speak to the specific regulation here, but I can say later states like Michigan has a 10%. Massachusetts is around the same. I believe it's 10.75. And so I think that they're trying to strike a balance, I would imagine, because right now, even though cannabis businesses are highly regulated, legal, licensed companies, because of federal prohibition, because cannabis is still illegal at the federal level, they are not able to take normal business deductions that other businesses can take. So they're far more highly taxed. And because they're regulated, there's tons of, testing fees, licensing fees, things that apply. So I think that there is an assumption that, cannabis companies are making a ton of money, are hugely profitable, but in reality, there's a ton of barriers to profitability. So I think that 10% tax is in line with what we're seeing in later states. Some of those earlier states like Oregon, 37% tax rate, their industry is really suffering from that because they're barely able to break even. And so we have seen some problems with tax rates that are too high. But Tom, I'd love to hear from you too about specifically in Ohio.
Yeah, so under issue 2, it's a 10% tax at the point of sale, in addition to local, sales taxes, which means in Cuyahoga County, I think the tax at the point of sale will be closer to 16 or 17%, actually at the end of the day. So that's higher than a state like Michigan, right? But one of the things, as I mentioned, when we were drafting issue 2, we looked at what are some things that states did well, where did states struggle, and how can we improve on that under issue 2. And you look at a state like Michigan, they've done a tremendous job of driving the illicit market for marijuana out of business because their operators are able to compete effectively with those drug dealers because on price, they're competitive, and obviously on quality and reliability, it's no contest, right? The regulated market wins every time. But you look at some other states where they have these very high tax rates, and it makes it difficult, as Michelle said, for those operators, number one, to remain profitable, but number two, to compete with the illicit market. So, the two biggest opponents of issue 2 are drug dealers and Michigan dispensary owners, because we're going to be able to compete on price and quality and reliability.
I know Bill and Gary, specifically Bill, you have an issue with the 10% tax. You're thinking that it's way too low for the social impacts that you think this will have.
I think that's correct. The tax in Colorado they actually tax both at the retail and the wholesale level, and the retail tax is 15%. And the Centennial study that was done out there in 2018 showed that it was $4.50 in social costs additional for every dollar of revenue. It's possible that's a little high, a little low. You can argue with the methodology, but even if you cut it in half and you say they were 50% wrong, the social costs still far outweigh the taxes, and Colorado's tax was higher than Ohio's is to be proposed.
Great. All right. We have some more comments coming in here, and I'll just kind of read some of these. Gail says, in Colorado, statistics show that opioid use was reduced by 25% as people were able to treat their pain and or addiction with cannabis. Dwayne tells us that I think he's saying, you care about secondhand smoke. I don't want to smell my neighbor's weed, which I think we've covered some of that, as a possible negative. But there was another one here, and I wanted to get back to it. Maybe it's not possible because we had so many people participating, and we thank you guys for chiming in. You know what? And I don't see it now because all the comments have reinvented themselves. the beauty. Oh wait, no. Here we go. Okay, so Rachel at 6'10", and I apologize. I'm just now getting to this. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It says is caused by chronic marijuana use and can have deadly consequences. Are anybody on our panel familiar with this particular syndrome and the effects of it? If not, okay, no worries. But
she may be referring to what's called scromiting. That is heavy marijuana use induces violent vomiting and screaming at the same time. If you can imagine, before I began to study this, I'd never heard of such a thing, but that is a phenomenon that occurs with heavy cannabis use, particularly when the THC is high.
Tom or Michelle, do you guys have any concerns about heavy marijuana use and health implications? Because, as we talked about, some of these dabs can be 90% plus, and if people are using that a lot, that might be able to have an effect. What do you guys think about that question?
Well, I think that speaks to the need to have a very safe and regulated market, right? So that consumers know exactly what the potency is in the products that they're buying, so that people, again, when you buy a product on the illicit market, your drug dealer isn't testing the potency of those products. So they may tell you it's whatever, 15%, 5% potency, but you actually have no way to validate that. And so contrast that again with the regulated market, where consumers know exactly what the potency is in the products that they're buying, because that product has been tested, once, maybe more than once, as a matter of fact, before that product even makes it to a dispensary shelf to ultimately be sold to a consumer.
Well, that might be a valid point. If the THC limit were a lot lower, then the testing would be valid and would be safer. But when you get THC that high, it is inherently unsafe. I don't care how many times you test it or how pure it is, that makes it even worse. And so that argument kind of trips over itself.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Karen.
As we've talked about before, laws on drinking and driving while under the influence of marijuana would stay in place. But I'm wondering about the effect on employers. And Raz is someone who addressed this in her comment. Can your boss fire you if you test positive? Those laws would still be in place if recreational marijuana is legalized, right? And I'll ask either Gary or Bill about that.
I think certainly the employer has a right to still drug test you. If you're positive, they don't want you on the job site. You're a risk to yourself. You're a risk to your fellow employees, and you're a risk to the product that you're manufacturing or the job that you're doing.
And there's been some concern about the cost of implementing those testing procedures on businesses. Tom, I want to ask you, is there going to be a detrimental effect on businesses who will perhaps have to test when maybe they're not testing now, though a lot of businesses are?
It's a great question, Karen. No. Again, you look at the data from these other states, employees in states that have regulated programs, their employees are at no greater risk of workplace injury than employees in other states. Nobody thinks it's a good idea to show up high at work, just like nobody thinks it's a good idea to show up drunk at work, right? Under issue 2, employers can continue to maintain whatever drug use policy best fits its workforce. For some employers, that might be a zero tolerance policy. I can tell you, we talk to a lot of employers in just our day job here, right, is attorneys. And a number of employers are adjusting their drug use policies because they I think recognize, in line with the data from these other states, that just testing positive does not mean somebody is impaired. When they go to work, people can use, adults can use marijuana responsibly outside of work and show up to work Monday through Friday without any impairment. So issue 2 maintains flexibility for employers to use and implement the drug use policies that best fit their workforce.
There's another aspect of that, Karen, that most people may not think of, and that is the availability of the labor pool in some particular businesses. In some construction industries, they have to have a zero tolerance because one slip and people are going to get killed. And so they are very, very strict. And if you have, when things get legalized, if marijuana gets legalized, the highest use will be among the 21 to and basically in the 20s. Those are the kind of young people that folks in the contracting business are looking to hire. And if they, when you use this stuff, it stays in your body for 30 to 90 days. If they fail a test, they just are not hireable. And so they're really worried about their labor pool if this gets legalized.
All right, Bill, thank you for that. One question I do have, since we're talking about employers and testing and so forth, what about when you're applying for to rent a house or an apartment? What are some of those rules as they're written? Can a landlord kick you out if he sees you growing marijuana in your apartment? How is it written right now, Tom?
That's a great question, Jonathan. So under issue 2, again, we preserve, private property rights for landlords. So a landlord can prohibit smoking within their unit of adult use marijuana, just like a landlord can prohibit smoking cigarettes within somebody's apartment. They can also prohibit home cultivation of marijuana within a rented apartment.
Gotcha.
Well,
and Bill,
I beg to differ. Issue 2 says that the status, a landlord cannot reject a tenant application because of the status of being a user. And issue 2 also says that in your private residence, you have the right to grow, you have the right to store, and a landlord can prohibit combustion, i.e. smoking, if that's in a lease. But the other things, the clear implication of issue 2 is that a landlord can't prevent that. So what issue 2 does is it basically turns marijuana into a housing civil rights kind of a deal. So whenever anybody that uses marijuana gets rejected for an apartment, the first thing they're going to do is say, oh, wait a minute, I got a claim under this statute, and they're going to sue the landlord. That is going to happen. And so I respectfully suggest that this really takes a big bite out of private property rights.
Michelle, how do you feel about that? Any thoughts?
I think I'm just going to have to, I think Tom is an expert in the legislation. He's been following this for quite a long time and is,
okay.
So.
Yeah. Look, the explicit language of issue 2 is clear. A landlord can prohibit the smoking of marijuana within the unit. A landlord can prohibit cultivation of marijuana within a unit. So again, I don't know what to say other than, let's start telling the truth here.
Well, I've got the language sitting right in front of me, and both Jonathan and Karen have it also. So they can read it. I can read it.
So do I.
Okay. All right. Guys, we were hoping for 30 minutes and it's almost an hour now. My goodness, you guys have really given our audience and the comments coming in. We appreciate the participants. I want to give Karen a sort of a last thought here, if she has any, and then we can go around the room and everybody can sort of say their piece before we sign off.
Well, I want to ask about that illicit market that we've been talking about throughout this. And there is some evidence that according to the no side, that the illicit market doesn't go away when marijuana is legalized. It actually expands. And so I want to ask Tom and Michelle about that. But also I've got a follow up for the other side.
Gotcha. I know Tom has a time restriction. He's got to be out by 7. So yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Well, see, Michelle, I mean, I want to make sure she has an opportunity to address this if she would like to. Otherwise, I'm happy to.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, so
You can start and then I'll, yeah.
Again, this gets back to some states have done things better than other states. You look at a state like California, their tax rate is astronomically high, makes it very difficult to compete with the illicit market. But you look at states, other states, they've done a terrific job. Again, like Michigan, they're able to compete on price with the illicit market, and consumers have a very clear preference for reliable, safe, tested, regulated products. I mean, if you ask people in the industry up in Michigan, you ask consumers up in Michigan, people are buying their cannabis products from regulated dispensaries, not from the illicit market. So regulation works. It's the same reason why nobody buys bootleg alcohol anymore. It's the same reason why people don't illegally download music anymore. Regulated markets work. They drive out illicit operators. It happens in every single industry.
And I want to turn the question back to either Bill or Gary. You've even acknowledged the illicit market is going on right now. People who want to use marijuana are doing so right now. Why not regulate it and make it something that is safer and taxed?
Well, I think for me, it's because what it's going to do. I believe there's going to be an increase in crime. I think that folks that are maybe afraid to use marijuana now because it's illegal are going to use marijuana because if it becomes legal, and they're going to have the same financial problems that the folks have nowadays. They need to get their money from somewhere. They're either going to steal from people, they're going to rob homes or burglarize homes, things like that. I don't think the street dealer is going to go away. I think they're going to undercut the price of the dispensaries. And I think you're going to have a problem between the dealers then because, the guy on the corner of, Main and First is going to sell cheaper than the guy in the corner at Main and 10th. And I just don't see that happening where these folks are going to go away, which is evidenced by a report in Colorado that 70% of the sales are black market sales.
Gotcha.
There's
All
another component of this that we haven't touched on. If I can just take a second, is Issue 2 permits consumers, to buy from a dispensary and then give that to somebody else. It also permits people who home grow to give their plants to other people. And so there's no requirement that they verify age or status or identity of the person. The Issue 2 actually says it protects the right of marijuana users to assist each other. And so it's pretty clear that there's going to be, if you want to call it a gray market, because some's regulated, some's not. But Issue 2 expressly allows that.
All right. We are coming up on 1 hour, and I think we've had a really lively discussion. Michelle, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of have some last words here.
Well, thank you for having this forum. I really appreciate it. I think it's important. I think I would just reiterate what Tom has said, that, the whole point of Issue 2 is to create a regulated market for safe access to tested products. I think some of the things that Bill and Gary are saying, citing reports, I have not seen any of this play out in the statistics. I think that a lot of the comments we've heard tonight, again, are a result of the history of prohibition and criminalization and stigmatizing cannabis. And I think what Issue 2 sets out to do is to give people, again, the ability to access a safer, regulated product that's tested, that does not have harmful substances. Again, the illicit market is active in Ohio. People are driving to Michigan to get their product. This would help mitigate all of that. So I guess I would just.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. Gary, 20-second wrap up here.
I just think that, as I said earlier, I think that with doing this, we're going to put more people on the road that are going to be impaired. That's going to cost lives, and it's going to cause injuries, and it's going to increase the work of law enforcement officers, making the highways unsafe for everybody. People walking, people riding their bicycles, and people motoring in their vehicles.
Gotcha. Bill?
Yes, 2 points. One is they keep saying it's safe. 35%, 90% isn't safe. You can talk to any professional in the field and they will tell you that. It causes severe mental illness. The second thing is this is set up to specifically recruit, hire, and give preferences to drug dealers and criminals, people who have been convicted under the law. And it's going to bring them to your neighborhoods. Moms all ought to stand up and say, whoa, that's not for us.
Bill, thank you. And Tom, what are your final thoughts here?
Yeah, first I want to echo Michelle's gratitude here. Thank you, Karen, Jonathan, for hosting us all here. Bill and Gary, thanks for attending. Look, we're trying to tell Ohio voters the truth about issue 2. You've heard and had a chance to hear from the opponents and the same old reefer madness scare tactics that haven't worked in the other states that have regulated the sale of marijuana. These, by the way, are the same scare tactics we heard 6 years ago, 7 years ago when Ohio implemented its medical marijuana program. None of those scary boogeymen have shown up. Regulated markets are successful. They're the best way to protect public health, the best way to keep marijuana out of the hands of children. They're the best way to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new revenue every single year. And they're the best way to ensure that patients in Ohio have access to the treatment and the care that they need, that they still can't access in Ohio's medical marijuana program. So I would ask voters to vote early. You can go to the Board of Elections right now and vote. You can request an absentee ballot. And if you don't have an opportunity to vote early, we ask you to vote yes on issue 2 in person on November 7th.
Make an excellent point. This will be decided at the polls. It's not decided during this forum. It's up to the voters now to go ahead, take this information, make an informed decision on what's best for you, your family, and your community. Tom, thank you so much. Michelle, thank you. Bill, Gary, great stuff. And Karen and Ideastream Public Media, thank you very much for being a great partner in helping us with this. Karen, you are a consummate professional. We appreciate you, and thank you for everything that you have given us here this evening and getting us together for this.
Thank you for the opportunity. This has been a great discussion.
Huge thanks to all of those who have chimed in with their comments and questions. I'm sure there'll be more questions. If you have any questions that you want me to specifically give to our panel, please email me. It's investigatortips@wews.com. Investigatortips with an S @wews.com. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for all your time and talents. And we'll see you at the polls.
Thank you for having us.